Actually, I never used the second one until September 11th.
Okay.
So I get a lot of students who show up because it's a class about we.
Right.
What you're actually learning when you study history, you're learning the skills of thinking like a historian, working like a historian. And a big part of thinking like a historian is the kind of thing you're talking about.
Today's guest is a professor of history at the University of Cincinnati. He's the director of undergrad advisory for the history department. He's a published author and a podcaster, Dr. Isaac Campos. That'll be the signal that will, end the cast there. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah,
cool.
for sure.
Okay.
Sweet. So I'm here at the University of Cincinnati with Dr. Isaac Campos. You had another last, like a second part to your last name.
Yeah, my full name is Campos Costero, but I usually just use the first.
Right, because I remember at one point, one of the first emails I sent you, I addressed you by your second last name.
Okay.
Because where I come from, we use the second last name.
Oh, really?
Yeah. My last name is technically Abdel Nabi, so we wouldn't just use the Abdel part. That's just like an add-on, like a Van or a Mick.
Oh, all right.
And then the Nabi is the main name. But then you had informed me at that time. You were like, "Oh no, we in my culture actually we use the first."
So the first one is usually the paternal last name. The second one's usually the maternal.
Okay.
That's shifting now. People are mixing it up more than they used to.
Nice.
But so traditionally, if you're only going to use one, you use the first one, the paternal. Though if you have a very common last name like Garcia or something like that, then you might use both all the time just to distinguish yourself from the millions of other Garcias. So, but anyway, I always found it kind of a pain to use both.
Yeah.
Plus mine are both have multiple syllables, 2 and 3, so it's a lot, and so I always like just using one. But actually, I never used the second one until September 11th.
Okay. Hey everyone, before we continue the segment, don't forget to subscribe, like, dislike, leave a positive comment, leave a negative comment. I don't care. Thanks for watching, and now on to the program.
2001.
Oh, okay.
And then after that, I went to the airport, not immediately after, but in the months afterward, I went to the airport, and I think it was just my passport only had my paternal last name, and my license had both, and they said they didn't match. And I think my passport only had the one, maybe because I had gotten it when I was a kid or something. I don't know why. So after that, I was like, oh man, I better. So I almost wasn't allowed to get on a plane. They actually made me re-buy the ticket. We were flying to Colombia, I think. They made me re-buy the ticket on the spot in order to get on the plane.
What? That's ridiculous.
Which is ridiculous, because if I were if I was like a terrorist trying to scam them, then why would they allow me to just, as long as you buy the ticket again, you can get on the flight, right? That's when I started, just using both for official stuff, but I still, in normal life, just use the first last name.
There came a point in my life too, I don't remember exactly when I think it was probably during undergrad or when I was about to graduate, where I had decided to start officially using Abdel Nabi, because for the longest time it was just going by Nabi, which is what I tell, like how you do, tell just the common one first and then use the both for official business and stuff like that. But yeah, regardless of name complications and stuff like that, how's the school year been?
It's all right, pretty good. This fall I've had when you're a professor, you're always challenged by how to balance. We have 3 areas we are supposed to work in. We have our teaching, we have our research, and then we have what we call service, which is being the director. I'm director of undergraduate advising right now and serving on various committees and all that stuff. And anyway, ideally you can keep your research going throughout the year and your writing going throughout the year, but a lot of times if you have a heavy teaching load, or a heavy service load, that really presses into your research and writing time. For me, the ideal scenario is that I can just keep working on my research and writing regularly throughout the year, and then the other stuff, I can do it as much as I need to so I can do a good job without it infringing. This semester that's working pretty well because the teaching load's pretty light.
Nice.
And services, I actually have a bunch of stuff I have to do for service when we're done here, but But it's going good. Students have been really good this semester,
Nice.
and it's been fun. We had a really fun event yesterday, actually, here in the department.
Oh, nice. Very
yeah,
cool.
it was really cool with the students.
And you also have like another title. You're a director.
Yeah, I'm director of undergraduate advising.
Okay.
So that didn't exist, I don't think, when you were here. It's relatively recent. Well, maybe it did. I think it's been around for like 10 years.
I think Dr. Carr was.
Yeah. She was the
like
first
head
one.
of undergrad advising at the time. I don't know if there were like multiple, because isn't there someone else with you that does?
Well, there's a director of undergraduate studies. That position's always existed, and that's like the person who like kind of faces up toward the administration and that sort of thing. And I face more down to the students and advise the students directly. So, but Professor Carr was one of the first people who had that job. She was either the first or the second. I can't remember. I think she was the first to have that job.
Nice.
So it's a relatively new position.
Nice.
But yeah, it's cool. I like being able to talk to the students, and so I enjoy it. Actually.
Yeah, no, I mean, arguably you have, one of the most important positions, in all of humanity is, teaching. Especially at a university with like all the stuff you hear about, how universities are these days, and like, things just being thrown out of proportion, because, I'll always advocate for, going to a university if it fits the individual, just because, I've always been an advocate for, there being other stuff out there, other positions that, people may, cater more towards, like the trades, doing things outside of the norm that may not require a degree from the university. But I mean, me personally, I've always been a sucker for wanting credibility, wanting to show that, I know something and other people can vouch for me, with getting a degree, writing papers, stuff like that. So yeah, I like, especially, just coming back on campus, like last time and right now, like it feels good. Even though I'm not a student, I'll always, advocate for the university. So that's good to hear.
Yeah, I always loved being on a campus. That's part of the reason I became a professor. I was like, well, I can imagine having that life.
Right, definitely. One question I like to ask people, it's a question that I've, thought of a lot within the past couple of years, is essentially, what is, essentially the first moment in your life after you were born where it was the first thing that gave you definition or a part of your personality? So like, for example, for me, it was being diagnosed with type 1 diabetes at the age of 2. That's the first thing that like arguably had ever happened to me that gave me definition outside of, who I was born into, the religion I was born into, and stuff like that, stuff that is out of my, not necessarily out of my control, I'd say, but after birth.
Well, I'd say get diagnosed at 2 with
it's not,
is probably out of your control too.
Definitely out of my control, but it definitely plays a huge part into who I am, and because nowadays I volunteer for an organization called Breakthrough T1D. It used to be JDRF, so I'm getting more involved again with advocating for diabetes and advocating for the research and stuff. So is there anything that not necessarily has to be something like that? It could be anything. It could be like a book that you read when you were very, like the first book, I'd say, that may have impacted you, or what do you think is the earliest thing in your life that you can say gave you credit to where you are now, like why you're doing the things you're doing now?
That's a good question. I don't know. I mean, I know you said it's should be something that's maybe a little further afield than my family background or something, but my family was super, super influential. I mean, my mom was a professor of Spanish, and I ended up having a brother who became a professor, and I had an uncle who was a professor. My grandfather was a professor, so I think that kind of shaped my idea of what you could be, and that you could be that sort of thing. I mean, I've talked to a number of people who hadn't even thought of, it hadn't occurred to them that you could like become a professor, that you could spend your life on a university campus and study what you're interested in and teach, and I always liked the idea of teaching. I think there was a moment when I really started thinking about becoming a teacher, which was in high school. I mean, that's way later than than kind of what you were suggesting. But I had a teacher who was really, really kind of cruel to a student in this kind of blow-off class. I think it was my senior year, and I had I could take whatever I wanted. I took this, I think it was a geography class, if I remember right. It's a total blow-off. It was like, there was nothing really to it. But there was a student who this teacher like humiliated in the class. I can't remember what it was. The student, I guess he wasn't prepared or something. And he really humiliated me. And I had actually been working with that student, and in my work with that student and our talking to each other, and as we were supposed to read something together, it became clear to me that the student could barely read.
Oh, wow.
He was like a freshman, and so I was a senior. He was a freshman, I think, in high school, and he could barely read. So there was this kid in there who's already been like terribly served by the school system. He's probably feeling extremely self-conscious already because he's in this class where he's supposed to already know how to read, and he's 14 or 15 or whatever he was. And this teacher takes him to task for not being ready for something, and in a really, really kind of outrageous way humiliated this kid. And so I was so pissed off at this teacher, and I wrote this teacher a super long, I remember on a legal pad, letter of basically telling what an asshole he was for treating the student this way. He actually, to his credit, wrote me back and said said he really appreciated the feedback, and that he thought that maybe if I felt so strongly, I might be make a good educator. And so credit to him for kind of recovering.
Yeah, that's so cool.
Yeah, so that was kind of a moment where I started thinking, maybe I could be a teacher. Then I think I was thinking more like of a high school teacher or something like that. But anyway, so I don't know. Those are a couple moments.
Nice. Yeah, no, that's awesome. Your book, Homegrown. I remember, you talked about it during the class that. Actually, before we get into that, are you still teaching historical research? The 3000 class?
Yeah, History 3000, methods. Well, I only teach it, so we rotate on that. That's a class that's required for our majors.
Okay.
So I haven't taught it in a couple of years. I've taught it a bunch of times, so some of our faculty have never taught it. We just kind of rotate, and some people like to do it, some people don't. And so I occasionally teach it.
What are you teaching now?
Well, right now it's a little bit of a weird semester. I've got a graduate class that meets actually in this very room. There's only 8 students, and they're working on a big research. It's the research seminar, second semester of the graduate research seminar. So they're doing major research projects. So that's why that right now is kind of a light load, because they're all busily working at the library or at home or whatever, trying to write their giant papers. So I'm just waiting till they're done, and then I can, giving them advice, but I don't have to do much until they turn something in. The other class I was teaching just ended last week. Today would have been the last day had this not been a reading day. Is called something that I'm pretty sure didn't exist when you were here, which is called Careers for History Majors. And it's a professional development class. It's only 1 credit. And because I'm director of undergraduate advising, I teach that class rather than a larger class. That kind of is part of the payment for me to do this big advising role. And we kind of teach students about potential avenues after college for history majors, whether they be history-related careers like working in archives or museums, that kind of thing, or careers that use the so-called soft skills or transferable skills of the history major in some other, in the business world or what have you. So we have people come in and just talk about, a life in whatever field. We had people come in from the P&G archive, from the Cincinnati Reds Hall of Fame Museum, from the Over the Rhine Museum that's being created right now. We had a professor come over from the law school and talk about law school and a career in the law, and so forth. And so that's the other class I'm teaching. Okay. So that one's really fun to teach, but not really in my way. It doesn't really involve this much about what I learned in my scholarly work.
Right, and honestly, I think this is really important for people to understand is that. So I think, and until before this moment, I always was under the assumption that people within, faculty within a university, within specific colleges, all, taught something that they, specifically.
Designed.
Yeah, like
Mm-hmm.
Professor Carr does specific stuff with like legal history.
Yeah.
There's professors in the poli-sci department, same situation.
Yeah.
They all, and but I think it's really fascinating when you can, still be an educator in higher ed, doing things like teaching in a graduate class where I assume that they're all writing their own different type of arguments and whatnot.
Exactly.
And then you're doing this one credit class that prepares people, which is extremely important for, especially in this day and age, just to even give, hope, I guess is the term, or, what's the word I'm looking for?
Aspiration,
yeah. Influence, the generations that come to just, go out and, keep searching for whatever position it is that you desire in the moment. Search for something that doesn't sound even good in the moment. Maybe it turns out to be something you really like and stuff like that. So
we didn't. We didn't used to teach this. It used to be when I was in college. I never gave I don't think I gave a career a second thought until I graduated. And back then, in the early '90s, it was easier to do that because college was way less expensive than it is now, right?
Right.
I mean, way less expensive. I tell the students this every time I teach this class. I went to the University of Michigan, which at the time was the most expensive public university in the country. Now, I was from Michigan, so I paid in-state tuition, okay? But in today's dollars, so adjusting for inflation, I paid, I didn't pay, my parents paid $4,500 a year for the most expensive public university in the country.
That's
way less money than you have to pay today.
Yeah.
Michigan now, in today's dollars, of course, is closer to $17,000 a year, which now sounds like a bargain compared to these other places that cost like $70,000, $75,000 a year to go to.
Right.
But it's still 4 times more than we were paying in the early '90s, and the education. Sorry, but it isn't any better. The gyms are way nicer. The cafeterias are way nicer. Every place has a climbing wall, but faculty are, same kind of faculty there always was. There's, still great libraries, but that stuff is just, so anyway, so that's why we teach that kind of class now.
Yeah.
And, most of what I teach are courses of my own design, but we have there's a few required courses in the department that we have to rotate, and we're actually History 3000, so that's the methods course we were talking about originally, that we might shift the design of that so that we have a little more control over how we teach it, which I actually have been advocating for because I think I could do a better job if I could just do it my own way rather than do it the way the department's been doing it for a long time.
No, I mean, regardless of, that class definitely, shaped a majority of, how I interact day to day, just continuously considering, everything has, a background to it, everything has history to it.
Mm-hmm.
It was very, another thing I definitely advocate for is not, because people always ask me, and when I tell them, I got my my degrees in political science and history, and then sometimes someone will be like, what kind of what did you specialize history, like Middle Eastern history,
Mm-hmm.
Asian history? Is like, no, I basically just learned how to do historical research. Like, that's the important part, is that if you give me anything, any topic, I know exactly where to go, what to look for, how to make sure the primary and secondary sources are credible, putting it all together, writing the actual document out, so on and so forth, coming up with the arguments. So because that, I mean, especially in today's day and age, where, because majority of the stuff that I consume on a daily basis just to fill the void, honestly, when I'm working and whatnot, is a lot of, podcasts, especially like, political podcasts, regardless if it has to do with like my studies or if, or debates or, anything of the sort. I'm always, just consuming, just, taking in consideration that, everyone has their arguments, and those arguments have their counter arguments, and especially with the stuff that happened recently with all like the murders and whatnot. It's just like now more than ever is it important to continuously advocate for discourse amongst like the people that we don't necessarily either get along with or don't agree with, because at the end of the day, I mean, we're just people. We're all just here. Like,
right.
These opinions aren't going to go with us, to the afterlife. So,
sure. Well, I think that's people have a misconception that you do a history degree in order to learn a lot about what happened in the past and then remember all of that. Most of what you study, you're going to forget it unless you're applying it regularly. And I mean, I as someone I actually have a PhD in history and I teach classes on history, if I haven't taught a class in 4 or 5 years, there's big swaths of it that I will have forgotten. When I go back to my notes, I have to remember, wait, so, how am I teaching this section again? And oh, right, and I've got to put emphasis on this. You're just not going to remember it if you're not constantly applying it. That's just the way it goes. What you're actually learning when you study history, you're learning the skills of thinking like a historian, working like a historian. And a big part of thinking like a historian is the kind of thing you're talking about, where you learn how to see the world from multiple perspectives, put yourself in the shoes of other people, recognize that there's usually many, many causal factors in any kind of event, and being open-minded enough to assess the evidence fairly and honestly and be willing to change your mind about stuff. Those are like critical elements. You cannot be a good historian without those skills.
Yeah.
And those skills are super, super important in the world, both as just as a citizen within a democracy, and in the professional world as well. Because, in the professional world, they want you to be able to see things clearly in a clear-eyed way, assess them, change your mind if you need to, see things from the perspective of other people, be able to take in other opinions and really assess them honestly without a political axe to grind or what have you. And you just can't do history well if you can't do those things. And so that's the kind of thing exactly that we're hoping you walk away from this part. Hopefully remember some things about how we got to this moment in history. You will remember some things, but lots of stuff you're going to forget, and that's totally fine.
I mean, everything you just said right there is, I can't say that I agree with more. Because I especially myself and the things that the specific engagements that I hone in on daily. I don't know if you remember, but both my parents are Palestinian. So that's something that I'm keeping up with daily. And you're talking, and when you mention unless you're putting it into practice, then you're not going to remember things. Talk about me putting in practice consistently, just taking in all of the arguments from the opposing side to the side that I stand with, coming to realizations of ugly truths that I somehow I give myself a little bit of credit for just accepting ugly truths when they come, because there's no way growth can take place if I just deny certain realities. And it's just a crazy world when it comes to this kind of stuff, because you have people that purposefully fuel a fire where everything you had just said goes out the window, whether it's purposefully or intentionally or unintentionally. It's just and it's absolutely ridiculous. And so now your book, Homegrown, kind of tell us a little bit about that. I know a little bit about it already. And then answer the question in regards to going back to when we were talking about, the classes and teaching. Would you ever give a course on your book? Stuff like that, Has the university ever, proposed anything like that to you? Is that something that you that obviously I assume you're interested in, because that's your book. Why wouldn't you want to teach about it? So tell us about it.
Yeah, sure. So I wrote a book on the history of marijuana in Mexico. It's on the origins. It's really the story is about the development of ideas and policy towards marijuana in Mexico between the arrival of cannabis there in the 1530s down to its prohibition in 1920. Prohibition is a recreational drug. And the central question at the heart of that book is, how is it that cannabis developed a reputation in Mexico for being a substance that caused madness and violence? And not simply developed that reputation, but developed a reputation that was the overwhelming reputation of cannabis in Mexico. Overwhelming. Everybody believed that cannabis caused madness and violence, and this shaped its whole history in Mexico. So the book is about the development of those ideas, really, and then how that ultimately leads to its prohibition in 1920. Now, whether I've taught about that book, I actually have. I don't know. I probably started teaching this class in this way right around the time you were graduating. I used to teach a course, just a simple modern Mexican survey. So that is Mexico since roughly 1821 to the present. It was okay, kind of boring. I don't like those sort of survey classes with no central theme. It's same with the Latin American survey. I don't really like teaching it. Just too broad, too many things going on. I like there to be a question in the middle of life. And so I decided to revise that class around the theme of my book. So the class is now, actually it's got the same title as my book. It's called Homegrown, more or less the same title of my book. Homegrown, which is the central title of my book, and it's called The History of Marijuana in Mexico. The History of Marijuana in Mexico. Yeah, that's right. The History of Marijuana in Mexico. It's basically a sneaky way to teach the modern Mexico survey.
Okay.
But it's about weed. So I get a lot of students who show up because it's a class about weed.
Right.
But in the process of learning lots about weed, they end up learning the basics of all of modern Mexico from the early 19th century to the present. And it's a very easy way to teach it that way because the history of marijuana was very much shaped by all the contours of Mexican history from the early 19th century up to the present. Of course, my book ends in 1920, so I have to go way beyond where my book actually went to teach the whole history of this story. But it allows me to sneakily teach the students about Mexico while also teaching them some drug history. And so I've been doing that now that way for, 7 or 8 years. And I much prefer it to teaching the old survey, which I just found kind of boring. That was one of those classes that, every university department with a Latin Americanist is going to have a class probably like that. They certainly have the survey on Latin America. If they have a Mexicanist, they'll have a modern Mexico class. It's kind of boring to teach a class that way. I think it's more fun if there's a theme. So
yeah, definitely. When you had talked about the book all throughout historical methods, it definitely opened my eyes to why the stigmas were essentially taking place around not just the stigmas but the policies too, because the policies were born out of the stigmas, obviously. Mm-hmm. And I'm obviously one who, going back to what I said about, the university isn't for everyone. I don't think, and I don't think, everything is for everyone, obviously. Mm-hmm. And if we're talking about pot and whatnot, the personal experience that, kind of solidified that opinion in my head was when my dad had initially told me a story about the first time he had smoked pot and how it had just made him really paranoid and whatnot, and I was like, clearly not for you. It was not, mind you, the story when he told me it, he was at work when he did it, and he was working with stuff like new technology, these robots that took people from level to level. He was working on a construction site basically.
I'm just laughing. Why was he smoking weed?
One of his coworkers, I guess, offered it to him at the time, and so the story goes. Yeah. They light up a joint, I guess, or whatever. And the robot, I guess, gets triggered when it senses a chemical around, and it just stops working because they I guess took the robot up to the second floor or whatever to do that. So and then so obviously rightfully so, paranoid would definitely kick in.
Yeah.
But it had never occurred to him. That had never occurred to him. My dad's one of those, can't teach an old dog new tricks type of people. Like, one time and it's like, nope, never.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's a really interesting story because cannabis does produce anxiety and paranoia in a lot of people for various kind of biochemical reasons. But it's also any kind of a reaction you have to it, and this is a big theme of my book, is shaped by the setting of the drug use. And so if you're at work and you've never used it before, and then the robot gets set off because of the weed smoke in the air, you're probably going to get a little nervous that you might get fired because you're smoking weed at work, and that's very likely to make you paranoid. So that's still, that's kind of a classic story.
No,
It just made me laugh when you say he's at work. It's like, oh, well, that's probably not the greatest place to give it a try.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
That's funny. But yeah, some people, they don't, and like Jamaica, they say people, I think the way they put it is people, so-and-so doesn't have a head for cannabis or something like that. I'm not sure that's exactly the phrase, but it's something like that. Basically, and there is evidence that genetically some people just find the cannabis intoxication extremely unpleasant, and some people really enjoy it. And some people find it unpleasant at first and then learn to enjoy it. But there's a huge variation, and there's a lot of misconception out there that cannabis is like this, harmless drug that anybody could use and enjoy it. It's just not true. Some people really don't enjoy it. Some people should never use it because, particularly if they have a history of mental health problems or things like that. It's not a great idea.
Yeah. My girlfriend actually, though I actually have my medical card. Right. It's something that I don't want to say it like helps me. It just makes me feel good. It gives me a sense of imagination too. It gives me an ability to kind of see beyond like the thoughts that I have. It helped me a lot when I was writing research papers, honestly, because there were things that I think about that wouldn't come to mind until I had, became under the influence. And especially when it came to Dr. Carr's class, I was like, Jesus, these like papers, I write something thinking I think it's good, and then she just completely demolishes it. And then I'm like, okay, back to the drawing board. Let me get a little bit of influence. That influence helps out a little bit, so I'm going in the right direction. And it's like, so. But yeah, a lot of my creativity has definitely stemmed from that.
But you gotta be careful though. I was just reading an essay by Norman Mailer, the great mid 20th century novelist. He was in a rough patch in the 1950s, after he'd gotten some rough reviews of his second book, he was trying to put out, he was trying to put out his third book. I might have the chronology wrong, but I think that's what the situation was. And he was kind of stuck and feeling very self-conscious about writing, feeling a lot of pressure to do something, brilliant and that sort of thing. Then he started smoking a lot of weed while he wrote, and the way he describes it sounds very, very typical in that he starts really micro-analyzing every sentence, and then he'll made these changes that he thought were really brilliant, but then he later realized that actually the changes he was making were just kind of following up the writing for the regular. It was going to force any fast reader was going to have to slow way down to understand what the hell he was talking about. And at the moment, he thought it was really genius. So it's really interesting, actually. And then he starts getting super paranoid about the problems with the writing. So there's like a whole thing going on. He doesn't self-analyze very well about what was going on with the drugs, and though he does mention that the drugs were becoming a problem, that it seemed like it was solving his problem. I would never write. That's like a real taboo for me, actually, is to try to write when I'm stoned, because I get way too self-conscious and I guess self-conscious is the right word about the writing, and I can't. It becomes, a friend of mine described it as the analysis becomes too. How did he put it? It was kind of like it becomes sort of a micro-analysis. You're noticing every small detail. And so when you're noticing every small detail, you're losing track of the larger picture. It's kind of one way to think. It's hard to describe it. But sometimes I'll read something I've written. If I'm a little bit stoned, I'll read something I've written because I'm excited to read it, and then I start finding all these problems in it. And I've learned enough to just close the laptop and not look at that while I'm stoned, because I don't start making changes, whatever I do. Don't start making changes, because it's probably a bad idea. But, some people famously do perform quite well when smoking weed. So again, that gets back to our question. to the point that for some people it really works. You just kind of got to know yourself and learn from experience that whether it's really working for you or it's not.
Yeah, no, I definitely can't agree more with that, because for me specifically, like, I definitely know I'm a very unique person when it comes to me and being under that influence, because I've been doing it since I was, in my early teens, essentially. I was a skateboarder. I still skateboard. That's my main hobby I picked up growing up. And, being around a certain group of the community, weed smokers, obviously,
Sure.
influences and stuff like that. And yeah, I mean, for me, what you had described, for me, it's the opposite. When I'm, clear-headed, I'm a very stiff individual, very stiff-minded, very stiff-bodied. I don't really like sleep. I kind of just rest, and I don't remember the last time when I got REM sleep, or like, that deep sleep where you don't know where you're at, you lose like sense of time and stuff. I'm kind of just, always ready to be awakened. So the weed definitely helps me like come back to a place where like I can't even get a massage. Like, that's something that I've tried to do before, and I just, very tense. Like, it's impossible. Going off?
Yeah, it's going off.
We'll wrap it up with
All
this
right, sure.
conversation.
Yeah.
So
Too uptight for a massage.
Yeah, very uptight.
Oh, really?
I don't know what it. And it's like, I don't like being, touched really either. I have sensitive skin. It has to do with, I think, me being a type 1 diabetic. Just when being a type 1 diabetic, you're a lot more vulnerable and sensible to, just about everything, like infection, when your senses, whether it's smell, touch, the eyes are definitely its like own category. If you know anything about like type 1 diabetics, and when they don't care for themselves, the first things to go are what are considered the small cells. Like, obviously all cells are small, but in like medical terms, they refer to small cells as the cells that operate in your eyes, the tips of your fingers, the tips of your toes, and in your kidneys, and all your other like smaller organs, and those just start to shut off. That's why you hear about people like going blind or needing a foot amputated or losing sense in their hands. That's like the short-term symptoms of not caring for type 1 diabetes. And ironically too, back in 2015, my cousin was living in California at the time. She had lived there for some years, and I would go and visit her at least once a year while she was living there. In 2015, I got my medical card there, and the diagnosis that they allowed me to get the medical card for was for type 1 diabetes. And here in Ohio, I got my medical card in 2022, and type 1 and diabetes wasn't like an option to be applicable for, which that's like an interesting topic in itself, like, different states and their different policies of, what's applicable and whatnot. But it definitely does, like, just all the conditions that I have kind of just allow marijuana to like allow me to kind of come back to a more grounded area, just because, it might be, my genetics too, where I come from, very like tense environments, always, like kind of like always being, oppressed and whatnot, kind of just like all gets dumped into one mind. Even if it is living a very privileged life, the symptoms of that can like be shown very, minusculely through, being a tense person, being someone that, can't sleep, stuff like that. So for me, it like, I definitely advocate, because like, I mean, it's kind of like my vice, like how, people, have vapes. That's mainly what I do now, thankfully. I always told my friends that I'd get it from like the moment you can get vaporizers, that's all I'll get, because I just hate like smelling like it. I hate, how dirty it can get, just like crummy, and just like leaving a stench, and so yeah. But anything you wanna leave off with this conversation? Anything you're working on? Anything you're do you plan to write another book at all?
Yeah, I'm actually working on a few different big projects, a couple of book manuscripts. One is on kind of a guide to living in a world full of vice and temptations.
Okay. No, nice.
So mainly about cannabis as the vehicle, but to talk about that. But you know, I think applicable to, you know, legal gambling, social media and smartphones, and other drugs, you know. And then I've got another one that's a little more academic-y. It's kind of in between an academic book and a popular book on also the history of drugs. And then I've got this third project on Mexico City drug addicts in the 1930s that I'm not sure what that's going to become. I did a bunch of work on this about a decade ago, and then I didn't do anything on it for years. And then a colleague of mine in the field from the Netherlands, we decided to put a panel together for a conference next summer, because he was working on some records. My drug addicts are in Mexico City in the 1930s. His are like the 1940s in another part of Mexico. And we thought, oh, why don't we do a panel about this kind of stuff? So I've been working on that, and I'm really excited about that project, actually. There's a lot of really, really interesting stuff. I'm trying to understand the environment of drug use in Mexico City in the 1930s. And there's from, you know, the daily lives of these drug addicts, who were mainly from the low classes, the working class, usually very poor people living on very little money, to you know, the policymakers and the physicians who were treating them and that sort of stuff. So we'll see where that goes. I have a map of all this drug activity already done that a student helped me with years ago, and a lot of meat in that project. And that one's really exciting right now, just because I've just gotten back into it. And at first I was like, oh my God, where was I on this? And so it took like a week of going through the file, at least a week, a few weeks probably, going through all the files, going through all the stuff from my research assistant, just to remember, oh right, we did this, and oh, this is where we were with this part, and this is where we were with this part, and oh, here's where we left off. And so kind of putting all that stuff together, and then, but now I'm like, know exactly what's going on, and so that one's a lot of fun. So I don't know, that may become a book too, who knows.
Nice, okay. Where's this panel taking place?
Oh, it's at the Alcohol and Drugs History Society biennial conference, which will be in Paris.
Oh, okay.
Awesome. Yeah.
Nice. Heck yeah.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, if it's here, I'll come to it.
Oh yeah, no,
sure
it's in Paris. Thank goodness. It's always fun when it's in an exciting place. Last time it was in Buffalo, which was fine, but not as cool as Paris.
Yeah, definitely.
So we're all excited to go to Paris.
Cool.
Yeah.
Heck yeah, man. Well, I appreciate this. You guys can keep up with his podcast, History on Drugs.
History on Drugs.
History on Drugs.
That's right. Yeah.
Oh, nice. And buy his book, Homegrown.
Yeah, and read my newsletter on Substack. It's called History on Drugs. Same thing.
Nice.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr.
All right. Thank you. We'll see you.
Hey everyone, thanks again for watching. It means a lot. Don't forget again to subscribe, like, dislike, leave a positive comment, leave a negative comment. I don't care. Thanks again for watching. We'll catch you next time.